Hey guys, Youngblood with you for another episode of Exploring the Starmap, this time checking out what is currently a vanduul system, but wasn't always that way, and that's Caliban. Now first off, RSI does blur out some of the visuals on the vanduul systems on the Starmap, so this one may be a little bit annoying to look at, so feel free to just kind of turn away and listen if that suits you better. The discovery of this system dates back to 2341, and it was only the sixth system that had been discovered by humans at this point, or at least the way to get there at that point, so it was a much smaller universe in terms of where we could go. Now, this one was found when a hauler by the name of Ashley Gahn was running a load through the Null system when she got attacked by pirates. And in her attempt to escape, she just punched her quantum drive and basically just booked it. And as she was rifling through that scanning data, seeing if she was still being followed, she ended up seeing an anomaly on the radar, which turned out to be a jump point, which of course ended up being the one that led to Caliban. She did get to name the system, which she chose to name after her grandfather, and the discovery basically made her a hero to the UNE. Now, despite that hero status, though, she didn't actually care for that type of life, so she just sold that data to the UNE and basically just kind of retreated into the black, which opened the door for the UNE Pathfinders to get moving and start searching, and what they found ended up being pretty interesting. It was a human settlement on a moon surrounding the fourth planet. Now, it was a pretty crappy shed and it appeared to be uninhabited for years, but inside there was a bunch of very valuable ore that would have been pretty difficult to extract. So what happened, though, was people started to think that Gahn was a liar, or potentially even worse, a pirate that had basically been living in that shack for years and only claimed the discovery for the riches. Or potentially she killed somebody else that had been living in the shack and then was able to claim it. Whatever. People were throwing all sorts of slander her way. But she had enough of that and basically felt compelled to give an interview, which drew a ton of attention. But after she got done, people basically just flat out didn't believe her, even though she was sticking to her story and basically said it was the best thing she's ever done, but she's regretted it forever. Now, we never figured out what the deal with that shack actually was, but the official discovery of the system is labeled unknown as far as the date. Now, after the initial Pathfinders completed their scans, it was quick to see terraforming begin on Caliban 2, which would become known as Cryon. Now, millions came in, and this basically became a booming area of space, which was great until the large jump point connecting Caliban to Null collapsed. Now, while eventually a small one would open up in a very similar location leading back to Null, there was still a jump point also available to Oberon. That large jump point collapsing basically scared the hell out of the residents there, and they started to see a pretty large decline in population in the system. Now, that was basically the status quo until 2681 when the vanduul arrived, and that started with small raiding parties, but time continued to pass and severity increased, leading to one final battle that ended up being the largest battle we had seen since the Vega system. Now, in 2884, though, a kingship somehow slipped into the system undetected and just unleashed a massive and overwhelming attack that eventually caused the Navy to have to retreat and give control of this system over to the vanduul, who have held it ever since. Now, when we actually get to the planetary bodies here, Caliban itself is a G-type star, with Caliban 1 being the closest planet in orbit, being standard in a way that it's a coreless world. However, it's actually fairly far enough away from the star that it allowed people to come here and mine the heck out of this place, which was allowing them to get supplies for the construction of Cryon. Now, it's so useless now, though, it's been mined to ever-loving hell that even the vanduul don't even pay any attention to it. So I guess if you are going to come here and you don't want to be detected by the vanduul, maybe this is a place to go. Now, speaking of Cryon, that's Caliban's second planet, which is a pretty small world. It's rocky type that was perfectly placed in the green band, which basically made this a perfect terraforming candidate. Many people quickly moved in, especially to the capital of Boro, and it almost became a hub for people wanting to get out as far into the system and out onto the edges of the Empire as possible. And while it was relatively frontier-like in a feel, it was also a well-updated city with plenty of perks. Now, as the vanduul moved into the system, this also opened to kind of this place being the hub for activism to take place here. Almost like people coming out and screaming that the Empire was leaving them out to dry and not protecting them from the attacks of the vanduul, almost using that in a political way, showing the need for a strong leader like Ivor Messer, basically saying, look, because of the vanduul, you need me, so we're going to sacrifice some of these civilians. That's what they thought was going on. Even after he was thrown out, though, there was basically the system never really got the support that it needed, which probably ended up leading to the destruction of the system because the kingship that came in wasn't even detected. Now what you end up seeing here is basically nothing but vanduul harvesters that are just going to town on the planet and the building and just collecting anything and everything they possibly can, which are going to help them keep their war machines up and running. Other than that, Cryon does have a singular moon that's covered in craters. Those craters were being studied at the time when the vanduul moved in. No one finished these studies, but I mean, we typically know what asteroids and craters are from. Caliban 3 is a desert world that was a late candidate for terraforming based on the difficulties of doing that to like a desert-type planet. That being said, it actually had been started when the Vanduul were there. And with the Vanduul in town, though, they never ended up finishing that. And the equipment ended up falling out of orbit and crashing to the planet's surface, which opened the door for the planet to revert back to its desert state of affairs. Now, Caliban 3 does have two of its own moons. One that's very large but doesn't have much mass. The other one is kind of porous and lumpy. Likely was a kind of a transient asteroid from the asteroid belt that is in the system. Caliban 4 is a gas giant, has a high amount of silicate and iron that are in the atmosphere, which gives it a really cool color and appearance, but it's probably going to make it a poor gas collection location. The planet actually has several moons that are in orbit, though, starting with 4A, which is basically a dense ball of iron, which could technically make this a good mining location should you be able to get here. 4B has a magnetic field around it, which at least suggests that it has a metallic core. 4C is another iron-dense moon that kind of has this red and brown colors with some white streaks across it from the silicate. 4D is covered in a brackish ocean that's actually frozen over. 4E is basically constantly being battered with nitrogen ice storms, which basically means that the vanduul don't even come here to try and get the resources. And finally, 4F is a very dark moon based on the surface composition that kind of gives it a unique and a spooky feel. Caliban 5 is a really small protoplanet without an atmosphere, but something must be valuable here because based on our long-range and deep space scans, we can tell that the Vanduul are actually doing some harvesting of this planet, although we have no idea why. And finally, in this system, there is an asteroid belt that did initially have a ton of natural resources. However, now the assumption is kind of being made that the Vanduul have probably stripped them of all of their value, though frankly, we don't really have any way to know for sure. In addition to the jump points that I already mentioned to the unclaimed Oberon and Null systems, there are two others that are leading to Orion and Viking, which are both owned by the Vanduul and are probably where they came from. So who would find it of value to come to Caliban? Well, that answer is a bit tough because you're probably going to consider seeing, UEE lines that are set up in Null and Oberon to kind of help keep the Vanduul out and are probably going to try and keep people from going in. That being said, maybe you can take on missions to scan the area to see what activity is going on, and maybe that could be profitable, though honestly I'd be a little bit surprised if the government would contract those jobs out to civilians. It sounds like there are some locations to potentially do mining, but you may be crazy to take something into this sector and sit there making a lot of heat and signature that you're going to be doing in the mining process. So if you do get in, even if you're crazy, you may be better off taking something smaller and less obvious than the Orion, so the Prospector may be a better bet. Maybe you're able to take on contracts to go in and wipe out Vanduul threats in the system, or more likely, probably ones where you're saying, I'm going to hang out in Null or Oberon, so if Vanduul do come through, you wipe them out and you get credit for doing that. But in that same manner, I also see possibility for doing like repair and refuel ships like Starfarers, Crucibles, and Vulcans sitting in the other systems nearby to take care of military ships as they come back and are in need of rearming, refueling, and repairing. Other than that, I honestly think it's going to be a crapshoot, and it's most likely going to be visited by people that are going to want to be able to say that they've been there. So if you guys have good ideas, though, I'd love to hear them, so put them in the comments. But that's basically the Caliban system, and that's going to be the end of the video. So if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, stay tuned for more. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.